Last week we started to look at what is sometimes referred to as Jesus' Sermon on the Plain. Luke records the sermon in chapter 6 of his Gospel. And as we began to look at that, we talked about how the evidence seems to point us to the fact that this Sermon on the Plain in Luke 6 is a different sermon from the sermon that Matthew records that we know as the Sermon on the Mount in chapters 5 to 7 of his Gospel. But there are similarities, and that shouldn't surprise us. When politicians go out on the campaign trail, they often have what is known as a stump speech. It's a speech they give over and over again, hammering home the same points that they want to make. They may make some adjustments because they're in a different place, speaking to a different crowd, different current events going on. But the key points are the same. And the reason why politicians do this is because they want to hammer home those points they think are essential to their election effort. Now, Jesus isn't trying to get elected, and it'd be wrong for us to equate Jesus to a politician. But the Bible's clear, Jesus is a king who's inaugurating, bringing a kingdom. So it's natural that much of his public speaking would center on this kingdom he's bringing and inaugurating. Think how often he began his times of teaching with the words, "The kingdom of heaven is like." The king wants people to know about his kingdom because his kingdom isn't like anything the world's ever seen before. It's radically different. It's an upside-down kingdom where the poor become rich and mourners become filled with joy and are comforted, and sinners become righteous, and enemies are loved rather than getting what they deserved. In both the Sermon on the Mount and Luke's Sermon on the Plain, Jesus is giving a sermon that describes the character and lifestyle of the people of his kingdom. A character and lifestyle that is radically different from those who inhabit the kingdom of the world. Now, it's easy to look at either Matthew's Sermon on the Mount or Luke's Sermon on the Plain and maybe miss seeing the forest for the trees. The trees in both sermons are the individual subjects that we love to focus on. Things like guidelines for how to deal with your money or deal with sex and marriage and anger and attitudes of judging and condemnation. How do we deal with all those things? And they're very interesting to talk about, right? But that focus on these individual trees, well, it can cause us to miss the forest, the main point. And that is that Jesus is instituting a new kingdom that's radically different from the kingdom of this world. It's a kingdom that glorifies God by reaching the lost and transforming the found. That's what these sermons are about. Sometimes we become focused on the trees rather than the forest, and the reason why is because we're very focused on ourselves. Let's just admit it. We want to know, how can I improve? How can I be a better person? How can I make God love me and bless me more? What do I need to do? And when we ask questions like that and think that way, do you see what we're doing? We're putting ourselves first. It's all about us. If you hear Jesus' words concerning how we're to live and we think, now I've got it. If I live this way, God will be pleased and bless me. Well, that's just religion. You're not really hearing the good news of the kingdom. You're just hearing another works-based religion. Religion works to try to effect transformation from the outside in. Do this, and then you'll be blessed. But Christianity is different. It's upside down. It's inside out. Christianity says, only when I already have received God's blessing, already received God's grace, already have had a transformed heart, can I live this out. In both the Sermon on the Mount and the Sermon on the Plain, Jesus is speaking to his disciples. People in whom he assumes this change, this blessing, this regeneration has already taken place. Jesus' call is for how do you live out this grace that you've been so freely given? If you've been given love, how do you live in love? If you've been given mercy, how do you live in mercy to others? If you've been given life, How do you become a life giver to others rather than a life taker like the world is? If you've been given mercy, how do you show mercy? It's knowing and understanding God's grace. Well, that's what brings transformation to our lives. But along with viewing all that Jesus is saying here through this lens of grace, which is the only way we can look at it, we also have to view it through the lens of community. Jesus came to bring a kingdom. And by its very nature, a kingdom is what? It's a community of people living together. Jesus never intended for Christianity or his teachings about Christianity to be taken in an individualistic way that is just about me and Jesus and nobody else. It's not much of a kingdom if there's only one person in the kingdom. That's what's so sad about us when we leave here and we go try to build our own kingdoms like the rest of the world's doing. It's a kingdom just about me. You can't read these sermons of Jesus and think only in terms of how you need to change. Because if that's the way you're thinking, nothing's going to change. Because every one of us is self-deceived. We can't see the truth about ourselves. Christianity is designed for transformation to happen in a community. Hebrews 3:13, the writer says, "Exhort one another every day as long as it's called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin." Who is in your life that's exhorting you daily? Who's in your life that you are exhorting daily? This is the only way transformation comes to a person's life. And without that transformation, look what it says, hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. That's what happens to our hearts. In our self-deceit, left to ourselves, we become hard-hearted, blind to our sin. We live in a very individualistic culture, don't we? So, culture here in America that celebrates rugged individualism. That's what many believe our country was built on, and I guess, in a sense, it was. But it's a very dangerous thing. In The Great Divorce, C.S. Lewis captures well what happens to people who are individualistically self-centered. Character asks a resident of hell why hell seems to be such a desolate place. Listen to the explanation. The inhabitant of hell says, "The trouble is everyone is so quarrelsome. As soon as anyone arrives, he settles in on some street. Before he's been there 24 hours, he quarrels with his neighbor. Before the week's over, he's quarreled so badly that he decides to move. Very likely, he finds the next street empty because all the people there have quarreled with their neighbors and moved. If so, he settles in. If by any chance the street is full, he goes further. But even if he stays, it makes no odds. He's sure to have another quarrel pretty soon, and then he'll move on again, right out to the edge of town, getting further and further apart, so far off now, astronomical distances, millions of miles from us and from one another." Hell is what? It's disintegration. Absolute disintegration, and it comes as a result of absolute individualism. It seems like the way things are moving in our society, we're beginning to experience a little bit of hell here on earth. Moving further and further away from one another. Moving into smaller and smaller tribes. Moving further and further away from God. And the day's coming where we'll soon all live in our own little worlds. Not caring about anybody else or anything else, just us. Hell is all about disintegration because it's rooted in self-love. The kingdom that Jesus came to bring is all about reintegration that happens because of selfless love. Jesus gave of himself so we could be brought in. That's the model for the kingdom, the upside-down model. This passage we're looking at today from the Sermon on the Plain, it's about reversing the curse of sin. It's about bringing reintegration by loving those who can't do anything for us. Loving those who are different from us. Loving those who are indifferent toward us. Loving those even who are hostile to us. It's all about how we as a community, by loving others well, can glorify God, reach the lost, and be transformed ourselves in the process. Luke 6:27-36. Hear what Jesus says to us this morning. This is the word of the Lord. But I say to you who hear, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. To one who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from one who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. Give to everyone who begs from you. From the one who takes away your goods, do not demand them back. And as you wish that others would do to you, do so to them. If you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. And if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to get back the same amount. But love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return. And your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, for He is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. Be merciful, even as your Father is merciful. Now, how do we glorify King Jesus? By loving one another well. This is what He wants us to hear. And before you say, well, we already know that, and we do that well here at Foothills, and honestly, I think we do love each other well. Notice Jesus isn't talking about loving our friends here at church, our family. What is He talking about? He's talking about loving our enemies. We're going to get to this big time in just a few minutes, but let me just say it right here at the start. When God chose to love us, we were His enemies. Colossians 1:21, and you who once were alienated and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds, He is now reconciled in His body of flesh by His death, in order to present you holy and blameless and above reproach before Him. We were enemies. We were hostile to God, doing evil deeds, and God sent His Son to rescue us. God didn't decide to love us because we first loved Him. He didn't choose us because we chose Him. God chose to love us while we were yet sinners, alienated, hostile, doing evil deeds. That's when God sent His Son to die for you, when you were an enemy. God didn't say, because you chose to love me, well, I'll transform you because you chose me. God says, I will set my love upon you in the person of my Son, Jesus Christ. And that love that I have shown to you is what will transform you with ever increasing glory into His likeness. Jesus said, John 13:35, by this all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Loving one another, it includes everyone. The rich, the poor, black, white, and everything in between, sheep ranchers and cattle ranchers, conservatives, liberals, and progressives. I know that's stretching it, but I'm not driving the bus here. Jesus is. Capitalists, socialists, people who can't do anything for us, people who don't care about us, even people who hate us. Think, how did Jesus go about bringing you into His kingdom? Were you anything like Jesus at all? While you were still a sinner, an enemy, in love, He laid down His life for you. If we want to reach the lost and build a community that glorifies God here at Foothills, we have to have that same kind of love, not just here inside the four walls with our fellow believers, but to those who are lost out in the community around us. The kind of love that Jesus is speaking about here in Luke 6. What we have here in Luke 6 is Jesus telling us what it looks like for us to love one another. It's a guide to relationships. And when you hear guide to relationships, what do you think of? Well, how do I love my friends, my family? How do I love my spouse? And everything here, I want you to know this, it applies to all those relationships, especially marriage. Love your enemies. Do good to those who curse you. Think about it. If this is the kind of behavior Jesus expects us to have with outsiders, with enemies, how much more would it be expected that we behave the same way to people in our circle of love? People we're married to, people we have friendships with. The main point Jesus is making here isn't to talk about how we have relationships with family and friends and our spouse, but rather how do we have relationships and show love to those who are outside our normal web of relationships. This is what Jesus wants us to see. How do we love not just inside our family, not just inside the walls of this building, but out into the community around us? Look at the kinds of people Jesus is calling us to love. Here in this passage, 3 different kinds of people. Look at verses 27 to 29. Love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you, to the one who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. As part of Christ's community, Jesus is calling each of us to love those who are against us, to love those who have wronged us. He's calling for each of us to love those who will ill toward us, those who are our enemies. And He's calling us to love those who have actually even done ill toward us, striking us on the cheek. Let's be clear what Jesus is talking about here. He's not talking about us laying down and letting people pummel us with their fists. He's really talking about people who hurl insults at us. That was what it meant to be struck on the cheek in Jesus' culture. It was an insult, the ultimate insult. So how does Jesus tell us to love those who wish us ill? We do good to them. We seek to bless them. We pray for them. And what does He say to those who have done us ill? How do we love them? You turn the other cheek. To turn the other cheek to the one who insults you is to say, I've already forgiven the insult. I'm ready to be reconciled to you again. I'm not going to count that hurt. Now, just doing those things, you have to know this. It's a very tall order. And I know there's some in the room who are struggling. There are people who have terribly mistreated you. And you might even think you've forgiven them. But you're really struggling. And you're struggling to love them. At best, maybe you're just indifferent toward them. And maybe you've even become hostile toward them. Doing those things is a very tall order, because what's our go-to reaction when somebody hurts us? In Tennessee, they had an expression for this. You better sleep with one eye open. Because our immediate reaction is, how do I get back at you? How do I pay you back? You slap me on the cheek, how am I going to get my opportunity to strike back? My guess is that most of you, like me, hopefully it's not just me, you have that immediate reaction. How can I repay what's been done to me? How do I get back? We don't even give people the courtesy of warning them they better sleep with one eye open. We just stealthily wait for the chance to avenge the wrong. It's not even just our enemies. Think about this. Let's make it into our inner circle here, if you will. How often has your spouse, a child, a sibling, become a temporary enemy to you? Said something hurtful or disrespectful to you, and you just couldn't wait for the chance to open up with both barrels and let them have it. What Jesus is asking us to do in all of our relationships, you need to understand this. It's totally unnatural to our human nature. Now, it'd be hard enough if Jesus were just telling us that we need to love our enemies, but He's not done yet. There's still 2 more groups of people in these verses that Jesus is calling us to show love to. And it might seem a little obscure at first, but look what He says in 29 to 31 of Luke 6. From one who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. Give to everyone who begs from you, and from the one who takes away your goods, do not demand them back. And as you wish that others would do to you, do so to them. There's some difference, I have to tell you, in how commentators view verse 29. Some think Jesus is talking about somebody who steals, who robs from you. If someone's comes to steal your cloak, give him the tunic, give him the shirt too. But I think the more correct way to look at this is that Jesus is talking about people coming to us in a difficult situation and seeking help. It's cold and they have no coat to keep them warm, so they ask for yours. And you're not just to give them your coat, but the shirt off your back as well. There are certainly arguments that could be made both ways, but I think based on the context, it makes much more sense to view the situation Jesus is portraying here as an act of need rather than a robbery taking place. And here's why. Verse 30, look what it does. It deals directly with giving freely to others who have need. And then after that, he goes back to somebody taking your things again. Well, they're taking your things because they have a need. You're giving them to them. Don't expect them back again. Just freely give with no strings, no expectation. And then look at verse 31. As you wish others to do to you, so you do to them. You wouldn't go steal from somebody and hope that they steal back from you and take even more from you than you took from them. You give generously to them because that's how you would want someone to deal with you if you were in need. This second group of people that Jesus is calling us to love well are people who are less fortunate than we are. When someone comes and says, I'm in need, you're to be overly generous. Not just give them the coat off your back, but the shirt off your back as well, if that's what it takes to meet their need. As we love those less fortunate than us, Jesus is calling us to be extravagant in our giving. As we love those less fortunate, Jesus is calling us into a spirit of self-denial, self-sacrifice, of doing without so we can render aid to those who are in need, and render it abundantly in love, just as we would want them to do if we were on the receiving end. For example, don't go out and buy generic for somebody and think, well, that's good enough for who it's for. If you don't buy generic for yourself, don't buy it for others. If anything, buy them the better brand and you take generic home. That's what Jesus is saying here. You go the extra mile, maybe giving them better quality, maybe giving them more quantity. Instead of thinking, how do I do the minimum to show love, you think, how can I be extravagant in showing love to them? Denying myself, going above and beyond to meet their need. In plain English, I think what Jesus is saying is that we really aren't giving sacrificially and giving in love until the giving actually begins to hurt us just a little bit. Jesus is going from preaching here to meddling, I know. Loving people who wish us ill, loving people who do ill to us, loving people in a self-denying, sacrificial way. But he's not done yet. There's a third group, and that group's comprised of those who are indifferent and those who are different. Look what he says in verses 32 and 35. If you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. And if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to get back the same amount. For God is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. Now I hope you haven't tuned things out yet, because this is hard. I know it is. And it gets even harder. It's not enough to just simply be civil to people who are different or indifferent toward us. We must seek to love them, which means we must seek to do good to them. That's really what it means to love others, is to seek their good. The natural human tendency is what? It's for us to be good to those who have been good to us or we think could do good. But you see what Jesus says? Even sinners do that. Even sinners have that quid pro quo kind of love. I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. Think how often we walk into a room And we look around and we think, are these the kind of people I want to associate with? Are they going to make me feel good about myself? Are they going to elevate my stature, enhance my position? Maybe the prime example, easy to pick on, high school kids, right? All the cool kids are at the cool table, right? And the chess club's there at the other table. And the new kid walks in, and who's he hoping will invite him to sit with them? Unless he's a chess fanatic, he's hoping the cool kids will invite him in, because that will enhance his position, his standing. The cool kids, they're going to size the kid up, and they're going to be thinking, can this kid elevate us, or does he bring us down? It's all about what you can do for me. You know what? It's not just sinners, worldly people who think this way. So do religious people, like the Pharisees of Jesus' day. That's why they were always so upset when Jesus was hanging around with sinners. How could he do that? They're demeaning him. They're lowering his stature. We would never do that. We're better. Religious people need reassurance that they're good, because you can never be sure you're good enough. So it's important you're always with a good crowd, and you look around and think, are these my kind of people? Are they upright, decent, moral people? The kind I want to be seen with? Will they help me feel like I have my religion, my morality down pat? Jesus is saying his followers have to be like him. They have to be different. Jesus' followers can't be transactional in the way that they love others. He's saying the world and religious people all do it the same way. They're transactional, doing as they're expecting others to do, and only doing if it elevates, makes them better. Jesus is telling us that we must never look at people and think, what can they do for me? But only, what can I do for them? Even when you're helping a poor person, you can't do it thinking, is this going to make me look good in front of the other religious people, for example? All we need to think about is, how can I love them well? The way that I would want to be loved. How can I love them even if they wish me ill? How can I love them even if they do me ill? How can I love them if they're less well off than I am? Even if they're indifferent toward me or different from me, how can I love them even if I'm not going to get anything in return? Can you love and serve people without getting anything in return? It's hard. Can you love others without feeling superior to them? It's hard. And if you don't think it's hard, well, you're not really thinking. I look at my own life, my own marriage, and I know I struggled for years and still do to love Carrie the way that I should love her. The way that Jesus is actually calling me to love everyone. I struggled to even do it with Carrie. Even though I promised to love her in sickness and in health, in joy and in sorrow, in plenty or in want, for as long as we both should live, I tell you honestly, the way I viewed love for a long time was very transactional. What's in it for me? If I love her, what am I going to get in return? And if I'm not getting what I want in return, well then, I'm not going to love her. Now I'll tell you what changed for me in a moment, but first, I just need to say this plainly, because this is what Jesus wants us to see here. That transactional type of love, it's not love at all. Luke 6:32-34, if you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? And if you do good to those who do good to you, what benefit is that to you? And if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Selfish love, love that's always calculating what's in it for me, isn't love at all. 3 times do you see Jesus says, what benefit or what credit is that to you? What is he really saying to us? Well, the interesting thing is, the word that our English Bibles translate as benefit or credit, it's all the same word. It's the Greek word charis, and it normally is translated as grace. What Jesus is really saying is, what grace is there in that? Grace is unmerited favor. It means getting favor you haven't earned, you don't deserve. If you only love when there's something in it for you, where's the grace in that? This kind of love that Jesus is calling his followers to is a love saturated in grace. Unmerited favor. It's a love that's not given because it's been earned or deserved. It's a love that's given as an act of the will. What Jesus is talking about here isn't a love based on feelings, but a love based on a decision to love. This is really important. Husbands and wives, you can make that decision that you're going to love no matter what. It's an act of the will. It's not about what you feel. You can do that with your children. You can do that with your parents. You can do that with one another. You can do it with the stranger out there. You can decide, I am going to show love and seek the good of this person no matter what they do to me. This is what Jesus is saying to us here. Jesus is not calling us to go out and like our enemies. He's not telling us we have to like those who mistreat us. He's not even telling us we have to like those who are different from us. Jesus knows you can't command feelings, but you can command love, because real love is an act of the will. It's based on a decision to seek the good of another by showing unmerited grace and favor to them. I'm going to do that no matter what they've done to me. But how can a person love like that? Remember the song, I thought love was more or less a given thing. Seems the more I gave, the less I got. What's the use in trying? All you get is pain. When I needed sunshine, I got rain. What's he saying? I'm not getting anything in return. What's the point in loving? The world cannot love without a payback. Because if you keep giving and giving without getting, eventually what happens? You go broke. You can't freely give grace to others unless you've freely received grace yourself. If you're bankrupt in love, you can't give love. And that means you're only going to invest in people you think where you can get a payoff. To reinflate your account, so to speak. So love has to be transactional, don't you see? That's why love so often is transactional. Because we don't have love of our own to give. We're always looking to get love. And I'll give if I get. But God's love's different. Look what the Bible says about God and love. 1 John 4:8. God is love. Love is the very essence of the character of God. And then in 1 John 4:19, we're told that we're only able to truly love. Why? Because God first chose to love us. Don't you see what this means? You cannot go love others without being filled yourself with the love of God. On your own, you cannot manufacture the kind of love Jesus is calling you to have here. You first have to find that unmerited favor, that grace. It's impossible for you to give favor to others until you've experienced God's favor in your life. Look what Jesus says about how God makes a way for us to give unmerited, unearned favor and love to others. It's only through Jesus that you can be equipped to do that. Look what Jesus says in verse 35. Your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High. Now, I want you to know this. If you truly take to heart and believe what Jesus says there, then you'll be empowered to start to do what Jesus is calling you to do. To love everyone unconditionally. But you have to see yourself as a son of the Most High God. As one who's already received God's favor. And I'll admit, at first glance, it looks like what Jesus is saying to us there is transactional love. If I do this, God will make me a son. It looks conditional. But you have to remember who Jesus is speaking to here. That's why I made the point early on. He's speaking to his disciples. People to whom Jesus already said, you may call God your Father. Because you've entered that kind of relationship with him. You are already sons of the Most High. What Jesus is calling his disciples, what he's calling you and I to do here, is simply to live out what God's already made us to be. John 1:12-13. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. How does one become a child of God? Believing. Faith in Jesus. But where does faith come from? Ephesians 2:8. For it is by grace you've been saved through faith, and this not from yourselves, it's a gift of God. Through God's grace. Through God's unmerited favor to you, you've been given faith as a gift so that you can believe in Jesus. And by believing in Jesus, what happens? You're born of God. You're adopted into God's family. Galatians 4:4-7. When the set time had fully come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law, that we might receive the adoption to sonship. Because you are his sons, God sent the Spirit of his Son into your heart, the Spirit who calls out, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but God's child. It's all because of what Jesus has done for you. And because he's done it, you are adopted. You are in. A Christian has to understand their adoption, because it's through understanding that we can love as Jesus is calling us to love. That's what changed everything for me. It took 40-some years before I understood my adoption. And once I did, and once Carrie did, honestly, everything began to change in our lives, in our marriage. Adoption in Paul's day, it's different than today. Today, it's all about children, little children usually. But in Paul's day, most often it was grown men who were adopted into a family. And most often the reason why was because a childless couple needed an heir for their estate. Adoption's a legal grace. The child doesn't do anything. The adult in Paul's day didn't do anything to earn it. Think what happened to the person that was adopted. At the stroke of a pen, they went from poverty to riches. Suddenly, this great person who was adopting them is now their father, and they have intimacy with him. They have accessibility to him. You can't call the President of the United States to come into your room and give you a glass of water at 2 a.m, but a son can call his father to do that. For a Christian, God is our Father, because through his unmerited favor, God's adopted you into his family. The Lord of heaven and earth, think about this, is your Father. And it's not because you've earned it. It's because God freely gave it to you by grace through faith. In spite of all you are, in spite of you being an enemy, in spite of all your deficits, you are rich. You are loved permanently. You're loved unconditionally. You're loved comprehensively. Do you know what that means? It means your bank account is full of love that you can go and lavish on others. You can go and be a conduit of that love. When people bump up against you, what will spill out of you will be the love of God, not venom and hatred. For a Christian, adoption is the greatest thing about them, because adoption is what makes them a child of God. But Pastor Jeff, aren't we all God's children? I used to have a kid in my youth group in Tennessee that would say that. We're all God's children. Well, God created everyone. And so in that sense, he is the Father of all. But not everyone's adopted into God's family. The Bible's clear about that. Only to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become sons of God. Only those who've received God's gift of faith and believed in Jesus are adopted as true children of God. As the Creator, God loves and is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Jesus says that here in Luke 6, in verse 35. But note the parallel Jesus is making as he says that. As adopted sons and daughters of the Most High God, we're to behave like our Father. We too are to be kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. We're to love our enemies just as God loved us when we were enemies. If you're a Christian, Jesus is saying to you, I want you to be to others as God your Father has been to you when you were his enemy. That's the power of the gospel. A Christian should always have at the forefront of their mind that they are an adopted enemy. What a contrast. We were all enemies of God. Nobody deserved to be adopted into his family. For those who received it, it's an act of unmerited favor. Being rich in unmerited favor, what should it do? It should make us rich in unmerited favor toward others. Generous in dispensing love, just as God has lavished his love upon us. Only Christians understand that they were once enemies of God. The world doesn't understand that. The world's self-deceived. The world either thinks, well, I simply don't care about God, or I'm friends with God, when really they have no real relationship with him at all. Religious people are using God. They're not friends of God. They're manipulators, trying to earn something from God. A Christian sees the truth about themselves, that they were an enemy of God. They deserved wrath and destruction. But God adopted them in, and that changed everything. Where do you see God being kind to the ungrateful and the wicked? It's at the cross. On the cross, you see God do the very things that Jesus is calling us to do. On the cross, you see God cursed, but what does he do? He blesses. On the cross, you see God mistreated by his enemies, but what does he do? He prays for them. On the cross, you see Jesus stripped naked so we could be clothed in his righteousness. On the cross, you see Jesus forsaken and made an outcast so we could be adopted in. Do you see how Jesus is himself fulfilling everything he's calling us to do here in Luke 6? He's saying, be like this, because I've been like this for you. What did loving you do for Jesus' social standing? He was mocked, went down into the dust of death, despised and rejected. And he did that to love you. What did loving you do for Jesus' self-esteem? Nothing. He made him who knew no sin to be sin for you, so that in him you might become the righteousness of God. Jesus, covered in the filth of your sin, became a reproach to God. And God turned away from the Son. The only way you'll change is to see yourself first as being so lost that the only way you could be saved was for Jesus to die for you, but then also seeing yourself as being so loved that Jesus was willing to go to the cross and die for you. Loving you was the joy set before Jesus that drove him to the cross. At the cross, he endured the white-hot wrath of God so you would only know God's white-hot love. Seeing that is what lets you look at people and say, no matter how broken they are, I was more broken. No matter how mistaken they are, I was more mistaken. No matter how they may mistreat me, I mistreated the Son of God even more. It was my sin that put him on the cross. Even though they were hostile to me, I was more hostile to Jesus. I was an enemy. But now I'm adopted in. Whatever they did to me isn't what's important. Jesus is, because he loved me and gave his life for me. Let's pray. Father, tall order to love those who are different and indifferent and in need and even enemies. If we're honest, it's really hard. I pray none of us would make light of that and think we do it so well. Would you help us to realize in this moment the only way we can even begin to pull this off is to see ourselves as adopted enemies. To see that when we were your enemies, you chose to love us and gave your Son for us. To see that at the cross, Jesus did everything for us that he's asking us to go and do for others. Would you empower us by your Spirit to live this way? To live in the love of Christ so we can be a conduit of his love. And I ask this in Christ's name. Amen.